Back live with you tonight, you're in Focus, and thanks for staying on. As South Africa marks Child Protection Week, the protection and safety of children remains a critical concern within communities as violence against children threatens their lives and well-being daily. According to the South African Police Services statistics, on average, more than 20 children are victims of violence each day in South Africa. We're looking into that tonight on this rather sensitive topic with Unicef South Africa Communication and Partnership Head, Toby Fricker. Good to have you, Toby, and thank you very much for your time. To my understanding, there are targets that we have set for ourselves as far as the protection and the rights of children in the country. But so far, reports seem to be indicating that we are not doing well in even achieving those set targets which we have set for ourselves. Why?
Yeah, I mean, you're right in that when we look at the statistics that we get every quarter from the South African Police Service, it's horrific. You know, I mean, the levels of violence are horrific against children and against women. Actually, in this last quarter, January to March this year, we see actually a 20% decline in child murders, but a 29% rise in attempted murders and also then huge numbers of grievous bodily harm as well, which is massively concerning. And it requires a whole of society response. You know, Unicef said that before. We work closely with the Department of Social Development, and we know programs that can work, and there are prevention and early intervention programs that can work and do work at a very local level. But the stats overall are not looking great, let's face it. But it needs to bring in a whole variety of partners from private sector, civil society, government, of course, and organizations like UNICEF and others.
Last year, for example, we're still talking about the trafficking of children, and we were seeing also a rise in abduction at schools. I think we were having that conversation with the deputy minister the other time. But my question is this, in your sense, linked to the socio-economic systemic issues in the country, or is it just purely a failure in terms of the policing of the rights of children?
Yeah, I mean, I think the violence against children, it's multifaceted. You know, it comes from all different walks of life. We see that parenting programming is absolutely critical, and that means bringing fathers, mothers, caregivers, extended family into the lives of children, playing that sort of nurturing, caring role, and getting them involved in programming, getting them engaged with their children, but also getting boys, getting men involved. So Fathers Matter, for example, a series that ran, and with our partner Heartlines, tried to do that, tried to really bring in role models, fathers who are role models into this discussion to see how we can bring people into the lives of their children and play that sort of engaging, nurturing role. But there are many sort of facets to that, and I think it's very difficult to pinpoint one particular issue. It really comes from a whole different areas of life, and that's why it's so challenging. But that's also why it needs to be a whole of society response, and that's why UNICEF, for example, works with multiple partners like Momentum Insure, who are supporting the Safe Parks, and other partners out there.
Yeah. Speaking of safe parks, you will know that we are dealing still with the issue of 21 children who died in a tavern in the Eastern Cape, in Scenery Park. And part of the issues that some of the community members were raising was the fact that these 21 children ended up there because they do not have safe spaces in which to gather for recreational activity and so on and so forth. And so the only outlet that they have is to actually go to these nighttime establishments. And hence we ended up with a number of children who were there underage ending up losing their lives. In terms of the work that you're doing with the safe parks, I mean, is there broader work, maybe especially around rural communities, that needs to be done as far as creating those spaces?
Yeah, there absolutely is, and I think having a safe place to play, having a safe space for young people, for youth to be together, to engage together is absolutely key. And actually UNICEF just did a what's called a knowledge, attitudes and practices survey on how parents and caregivers play with their children. And that revealed also that a lot of parents and caregivers raised the issue that there just weren't enough safe places to play. And that really was one of the recommendations. How can we be creative in finding those places? And I think UNICEF, working with the Department of Social Development on the RESIHA program, the resilience program nationwide, which is also supported by Momentum Insure, by other partners, tries to do that. So we try to position the safe parts are positioned in areas where the many vulnerable children live, and they provide a holistic support service. So on a simple side of things, it really provides a space for children to learn, children to play. And it also provides child and youth social care workers who are there to guide, who are there to be with the children, who can refer to children to more specialised support if needed. So it's a really holistic look at how can we support some of the most vulnerable children, bringing in nutrition, bringing in health as well under one roof, so to speak.
Do we still, Toby, from where you're sitting, derive value, for example, from commemorating and observing weeks like Child Protection Week, and are we doing something of value and meaningful during that week that certainly changes either the legal regime or in terms of social development, how budgets are spent and so on and so forth?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very important to recognise Child Protection Week. It's very important to keep the story out there, let's say. Keep talking about the issue, keep talking about, what we are seeing, these high levels of violence, unfortunately, against children. Because there are things being done, there are things we can do. And it brings that sort of advocacy back into the space, into the public domain, about how can we work with all sorts of partners to really try and keep pushing. We can't give up. There's always hope out there. There's a social worker I met a while back at Cliffspreet, which is a safe park that we support and work at, who herself was an orphan. She was kicked out of her home by her uncle, and she was literally on the streets and really at risk. The safe park was nearby, thankfully for her, and she went to the safe park. She got support there. She basically said it saved her life. So there are stories. There is hope out there. We do see it, but it's absolutely critical to keep it high on the agenda. The South African government has very advanced policies. The constitution is there to protect children, and we need to sort of step up and really help to do that.
And in your work, and speaking of hope, I mean, high praise goes to Momentum Insure for actually coming on board and teaming up with yourself, especially around this particular matter. But do you find that is an isolated case, is a singular story, or private sector partners more and more awaken to this particular effect of child protection?
Yeah, I mean, I think the private sector, like Momentum Insure, are very aware of the importance of the safety and the protection of children, because it's for the benefit of society as a whole. A child cannot develop fully. They can't reach their full potential if they're not feeling safe, if they're not protected. And then they're living a life in fear, which impacts on their mental well-being, it impacts on their physical well-being. And that's actually absolutely critical for not only the child and the family and the community, but for the country as a whole. So actually what we saw last year in 2022, there was a global brief that UNICEF worked on with other partners. And it actually highlighted the economic impact of violence against children. And what we saw was globally, it can actually impact GDP, gross domestic product, by 8%. So it's a massive impact economically as well. And South Africa and in fact most countries cannot afford that right now.
What are the activities then that you are planning to participate in this week as you're raising the awareness?
Yeah, so our UNICEF's deputy representative has been in Cape Town, in Hout Bay. There's been a series of engagements, both with civil society, but also with children, with young people on the ground, talking about some of the issues that we're talking about. What are the key factors that are driving this violence? How can we as UNICEF, but how can we as a society come in to try and help to support and to reduce those levels? So it's about opening that dialogue. It's about about, looking at the programming that already exists, like Rasiha, and seeing how we can further develop that, seeing how we can build capacity of child and youth and social care workers, and really take that to the next level. But importantly, getting the voices of children, young people, parents, caregivers in there.
Toby, I appreciate your time. Thanks so much for coming on tonight and highlighting some of these issues for us. That's Toby Fricker. He's the head of communication and partnership at Unicef South Africa on the child